Hello, book lovers and English learners. Welcome to our September live read along and this new session, live reading session. I'm Lydie Bureau and I'm an English teacher in France. I'm also the founder of Lydie's Book Club, in which I host live readings of adaptations of classics of literature and contemporary novels. I also tend to prioritize books that are written by women. So each month we read and explore a different book for all levels of English. And at the end of each reading week, I meet the members of the book club in a live workshop via Zoom to discuss the chapters read over the week of the book that we are currently reading. And this month we are reading the B2 Upper Intermediate adaptation of Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. This is the 2008 Penguin Readers edition, so it's quite an old one. If you want to know more about this novel and Daphne du Maurier's work, I invite you to listen to the podcast episode 24, Lydie's Book Club podcast episode, in an introduction to Daphne du Maurier and Rebecca, which is available on this YouTube channel and also on Spotify podcast, Read in English. So today it is our fourth live reading session, and we are going to read chapters 7 and 8 today. This Saturday, I will host the second live workshop session, and we will cover chapters 7 to 10, so the final chapters. So if you want to attend this live session, then you need to subscribe to the book club just by clicking on the link in the description of this video. You can find all the information and all the upcoming dates of the live readings and workshops on my website for each month. Each time we start a new live reading session, live reading series, and you just need to just click on the link in the description, and all my Instagram live readings are recorded. So if you're not able to attend the live on Instagram, then you can listen to it in your own time on YouTube and on Spotify as well. And finally, I'm pleased to announce that you can now purchase the 3-part live workshop of Our Wives Under the Sea, which was our August live read along. And we did a series of 3 live workshops, and you don't need to become a member of the book club to purchase the live workshop. So once you purchase the workshop, you'll be asked to create your login, and this way you get a private access to the videos to watch and enjoy at your own time, at your own pace. If you want to explore and discover this novel, and if you like dark romance, then you might like this one. The link is in the description as well. And I hope that you will like this one. There are other live workshops that you can purchase from previous readings. So just browse on my website and have a look. Right, so now let's recap the last chapters that we read in the last session. So here, a quick recap now. So we read last session, we read chapter 5 and 6, in which we learn more about the circumstances of Rebecca's death. So remember, Rebecca was Maxim's first wife, and she died in very curious circumstances. And it's when Mrs. de Winter, the new wife of Max de Winter, sorry, and a new and young wife of Max de Winter, She is talking with Frank Crawley, Max's business manager, and and this man seems to be like an ally to Mrs. De Winter. We don't know her name, so we're going to call her Mrs. De Winter, the new Mrs. De Winter. Um, so he seems to be nice with her and be understanding and on her side um, when um, when she's trying to confide in him. So he starts answering her questions about the circumstances of Rebecca's death. And we learn that Rebecca went sailing on this little boat uh, in during the night. It was a very stormy night, and she was on her own, which was something quite unusual, especially that the weather wasn't best, or and that it was night. It was at night, and apparently there was a big storm or a strong wind, and the boat turned over, and she fell into the water and drowned herself. So we only found her only 2 months later, um, in near Edgecumbe, which is about 60 kilometers from where Manderley is, so where the boat was, and from the from the harbor, the little harbor near Manderley, and and that's something that it's quite suspicious for Rebecca, knowing that um, the the bay. She wonders how she could have drowned herself, knowing that the water there wasn't very very deep. So it raises a few questions, but it seems like she went sailing quite far from the bay, and then which was much deeper further away. So yeah, and these information seems to be quite unsettling or yeah, for Mrs. De Winter. So um, she's happy that Frank had the honesty to share this with her, and was happy and although it seemed like he was quite reserved in a way of saying too much, it really limited himself to the minimum. She is asking questions, and she can feel that Frank is a little bit uncomfortable talking about this. And then Maxim, we learned that Maxim went to London for public speech for an event, a dinner, a public dinner, and um, and Rebecca was on her own at Manderley, and then at this time we discover a new character, Jack Favell, uh, who is not someone that Mrs. De Winter, the young Mrs. De Winter, is going to really like the behavior. Is going to act in a very intrusive way, and she's not gonna like the ways addressing himself to her, um, and asking her to get into his car to have a little drive um, to the gate, and she's going to refuse, pretending that she has something else to do. So she she's going to just um, leave it there. But apparently, Maxim is going to learn that from someone else that Mrs. Danvers, remember, Mrs. Danvers is the housekeeper, and she's not welcoming at all. She is quite she's manipulative. Remember, she tricked Mrs. De Winter to wear this dress that Rebecca wore during last dinner, and and she knew perfectly that, and she kind of influenced the young Mrs. De Winter to wear this dress or to look the same as the portrait in the gallery or in the stairs. I see. Hi guys, hello Kitty. Thank you for joining and listening to this live reading. Hi again, Kitty. I'm glad that you're able to join this afternoon. I'm just doing the quick recap of chapter 5 now. And that's fine. You're not late. You're actually at the right time because as you know, I always do the little recap of the previous chapters. So I haven't started the reading yet, so you're fine. So yeah, here um we so we learned that this man, Favell, Jack Favell, is in contact with Mrs. Danvers because she let him in, coming inside the property, and they probably discuss or exchange. I don't know. They had probably a conversation after meeting, before or after meeting, after Fadel met Mrs. De Winter. And somehow Max learned that he was on the premises of the house, and he was very upset. And he learned that it's Mrs. Danvers who let him in. And he didn't like that. And he got really cross and told off Mrs. Danvers. And as you can imagine, she didn't like that. And she looked at Mrs. De Winter with a very dark look and very scorn. So we came across this word, this adjective, scorn, which is like looking at someone in a very in a way you position yourself up to above that person. So you look the person down. So scorn is this idea of looking down on someone, having this kind of attitude. And now Mrs. De Winter is wondering whether Mrs. Danvers, sorry, yeah, there is an S, sorry, thinks that she told Max that she let Favell in. So yes. So she's quite worried that now she hates her even worse. So just to remind you that Mrs. Danvers um, doesn't like this young lady because she adored Rebecca. She admired her, and now she despises the fact that Max remarried and that this young, innocent or naive young woman has come into the house and took the place of Rebecca. So she doesn't really like her for this. Poor Mrs. De Winter. Okay, so now I'm going to start the reading of chapter 6 here. Oh, not chapter 6. Sorry, the fancy dress ball. Oh, sorry, it was chapter 5. Oh my gosh. Chapter 6 is the fancy dress ball. I do a quick recap. Sorry, I did chapter 4 and 5. Oh, what have I done? Okay, never mind. So, chapter 6 is the fancy dress ball. So, I talked about it just before. So, it's actually happening in chapter 6, in which so Mrs. De Winter dressed herself for this ball and she was wearing this red beautiful dress in and this hat which was the exact same fancy dress that Rebecca wore for her the last dinner that she hosted before she died. So she got the idea from Mrs. Danvers, and Mrs. Danvers knew perfectly that it would upset Max de Winter and would shock everyone. And this is what happened. And Mrs. de Winter couldn't understand why everyone was so shocked. And eventually, Beatrice, Max's sister, explained the whole thing, and this is when Mrs. De Winter realized how manipulative Mrs. Danvers could be and how she really wanted to hurt her, and as almost as a revenge from what happened with Favell, with Jack Favell. So it seems like Mrs. Danvers believes that it is Mrs. De Winter that talked about Mr. Favell, but she didn't, apparently. So who else knew that? You know that in this house there are a lot of servants and people around that could have talked. So who? Anyway, that's a mystery. Now let's start with chapter 7. The sunken boat. It seems to me the next morning, as I lay in bed, staring at the wall, at the faint light coming in at the window, at Maxim's empty bed, that there was nothing quite so shaming as a marriage that had failed. Failed after 3 months, as mine had done. For I no longer made any effort to pretend. Last night had shown me too well. My marriage was hopeless. We were not companions. I was too young for Maxim, too inexperienced, and more important still, I was not of his world. Even Mrs. Van Hoper had known it. So remember, Mrs. Van Hoper is the lady she was that employed her as her companion at the beginning of the novel. I was too young. Sorry. Even Mrs. Van Hoper had known it. I'm afraid you'll be sorry. I believe you're making a big mistake. I would not listen to her. This is what Mrs. Van Hoper told her. But she was right. Don't imagine that he is in love with you. He's lonely. He can't bear that great empty house, that's all. It was true. Maxim was not in love with me. He had never loved me. It did not belong to me at all. He belonged to Rebecca. She was in the house still, as Mrs. Danvers had said, and he would never love me because of her. Outside, loud clouds of mist hung around the windows, thick and white. The smelt of the salty sea. I could see nothing out of the windows. Everything was hidden in mist and silence. Suddenly, an explosion. An explosion shook the windows. It was followed by another and another. The birds rose unseen from the woods and filled the air with their noise. I heard the sound of footsteps running below. It was Maxim. I could not see him, but I could hear his voice. There is a ship in trouble, he was saying. She's signaling for help. She must have mistaken our bay for Kerrith Harbour. The mist is as thick as anything out there. If she's on the rocks, they'll never move her. I'm going down to see if I can do anything. So here, just for you to know, she refers to the boat. Okay, so in literature, all the boats and ships are called with are identified with the pronoun she. Yeah. Don't ask me the origin. I can't remember, but it's for the boat. It was getting warmer. A pale sun was trying to shine, and the heavy mist was lifting. When I reached the shore, the mist has almost gone, and I could see the ship lying about 3 kilometers out, with some small rowing boats already around her. In the dark grey motorboat was the harbour master from Kerrith. Another motorboat followed, full of holiday makers. I climbed up the path over the cliff. I did not see Maxim there, but Frank was talking to one of the coast guards, a man I had met before. Come to see the fun, Mrs. de Winter? I'm afraid it will be a difficult business. They may move her, but I doubt it. She's stuck on those rocks. What will they do? They'll send a diver down now to see if she's broken her back. A small boy came running up to us. Will the sailors be drowned? He asked. Not them. They're all right, son. They're all right, son, said the coast guard. The sea is as flat as the back of my hand. No one's going to be hurt this time. There's the diver, Mrs. de Winter. See him? I want to see the diver, said the small boy. There he is, said Frank, bending down and pointing. They're going to lower him into the water. Won't he be drowned? Divers don't drown. They have air pumped down to them all the time. Watch him disappear. There he goes. He's gone, said the small boy. Where is Maxim? I asked. He's taken one of the sailors into Kerrith to the doctor. I don't suppose anything will happen now for hours. The diver will have to make his report before they try to move her. I want my lunch. Why not come back and have some with me? I think I'll stay here a bit. I want to see what the diver's going to do. Somehow, I could not face Frank at the moment. I wanted to be alone. It was after 3 o'clock when I looked at my watch. I got up and went down the hill to the bay. It was quiet and deserted as always. When I came to the further side of the bay, I saw Ben sitting by a rock pool. "Good day," he said, his wet mouth opening in a smile. "Good afternoon," I replied. He stood up. "Seen the ship?" "Yes, she's in trouble, isn't she?" "Eh?" "She's on the rocks. I expect she's got a hole in her." His face looked empty and foolish. "Yes," he said. "She's down there, all right. She'll not come back again." Perhaps they'll get her off when the tide comes in. Perhaps they'll get her off when the tide comes in. He did not answer. He was staring out towards the ship. "She'll break up where she is." "I'm afraid so." He smiled again and whipped his nose with the back of his hand. "She'll break up bit by bit. She'll not sink like a stone, like the little one." He laughed quietly to himself. I did not say anything. "The fishes have eaten her up by now, haven't they?" "Who?" I said. "Her, the other one." "Fishes don't eat boats, Ben," I said. "Eh?" he said. He stared at me, foolish and dull, once more. "I must go home now," I said. "Good afternoon." I left him and walked up the path through the woods to the house. Just as I was having tea, Robert came in. "Mr. de Winter isn't back yet?" "Is he, madam?" "Madam?" "No," I said. "Does someone want him?" "Yes, ma'am. It's Captain Searle, the harbour master from Kerrith. He says the matter is rather urgent. He tried to get Mr. Crawley, but there was no reply." "Well, of course, I must see him if it's important." I wondered what I would say to Captain Searle. It must be something to do with the ship. I could not understand what concern it was of Maxim's. I got up and shook hands with him when he came in. I'm sorry, my husband isn't back yet, Captain Searle. I'm afraid the ship has disorganized everybody. Will they get her off? Do you think?" Captain Searle made a great circle with his hands. "There's a hole that big in her," he said. "She'll not see home again. But never mind the ship. Her owner and the insurance company will settle that between them." No, Mrs. de Winter, no, Mrs. de Winter, it's not the ship that's brought me here. The fact is, I have some news for Mr. de Winter, and I hardly know how to tell it to him." He looked at me very straight, with his bright blue eyes. "What sort of news, Captain Searle?" He brought a large white handkerchief out of his pocket and blew his nose. "Well, Mrs. de Winter, it's not very pleasant for me to tell you either. The last thing I want to do is to cause pain to you or your husband. We're all very fond of Mr. de Winter in Kerrith, you know, and the family has always done a lot of good. It's hard on him and it's hard on you that we can't let the past lie quiet. But I don't see how we can." He paused and put his handkerchief back in his pocket. He lowered his voice, although we were alone in the room. "We sent the diver down to examine the ship's bottom. He found the hole and was working his way around to see what other damage there was when he came across a little sailing boat lying on her side, quite whole and not broken up at all. He's a local man, of course, and he recognized the boat immediately. It was the little boat belonging to the first Mrs. de Winter. I'm so sorry, I said slowly. It's not the sort of thing one expected would happen. Is it necessary to tell Mr. de Winter? Couldn't the boat be left there as it is? It's not doing any harm, is it? It would be left, Mrs. de Winter, in the ordinary way. I'd give anything, as I said before, to spare Mr. de Winter's feelings, but that wasn't all, Mrs. de Winter. He found the door tightly closed, and the windows too. But he broke one of the windows with a piece of rock and looked inside. It was full of water. It must have come in through some hole in the bottom. There seemed to be no damage elsewhere, and then he got the fright of his life, Mrs. de Winter. Captain Sir paused. He looked over his shoulder as though one of the servants might hear. There was a body in there. There was a body in there, lying on the floor. There was no flesh left on it, but it was a body, all right. And now you understand, Mrs. de Winter, why I've come to see your husband. I kept looking at him, confused at first, then shocked, then rather sick. She was supposed to be sailing alone, I whispered. There must have been someone with her all the time then, and no one ever knew. It looks like it. Who could it have been? Surely relatives would know if anyone was missing. There was so much in the papers about it. What should one of them be still in the boat and Mrs. de Winter be found many kilometers away and months afterwards? Captain Searle shook his head. I can't tell. All we know is that the body is there and it has got to be reported. It's very hard on you and Mr. de Winter. Here we are, settled down quietly, wanting to be happy, and now this has to happen. But I've got to do my duty. I've got to report that body. He stopped at the door, opened, and Maxim came into the room. Hello, what's happening? I didn't know you were here, Captain Searle. Is anything the matter? I could not stand it any longer. I went out of the room like the coward I was and shut the door behind me. When I heard the sound of a car starting up the drive, I went slowly back to the library. Maxim was standing by the window. He did not turn round. I reached for his hand. I'm so sorry, so terribly, terribly sorry. His hand was icy cold. He did not answer. I don't want you to bear this alone, I said. I want to share it with you. I've grown up, Maxim, in 24 hours. He put his arm round me and pulled me close. You've forgiven me, haven't you? He spoke to me at last. Forgiven you? He said. What have I got to forgive you for? Last night, I said. You thought I did it on purpose. Ah, that, he said. I had forgotten. I was angry with you, wasn't I? He did not say any more. He went on holding me. Maxim, I said, can't we start all over again? Can we begin from today and face things together? He took my face between his hands and looked at me. For the first time, I saw how thin his face was, how lined and tired. There were great shadows beneath his eyes. It's too late, my love, too late. We've lost our little chance of happiness. No, Maxim, no, I said. Yes, it's all over now. The thing has happened. What thing? The thing I've always expected, The thing I have dreamed about night after night. We were not meant for happiness, you and I. What are you trying to tell me? He put his hands over mine and looked into my face. Rebecca has won, he said. I stared at him, my heart beating strangely, my hands suddenly cold beneath his hands. Her shadow was between us all the time, her shadow keeping us from one another. I remember her eyes as she looked at me before she died. I remember that last slow smile. She knew this would happen even then. She knew she would win in the end. Well, it doesn't seem like Maxim and Rebecca got were on good terms before she died. Maxim, I whispered, what are you saying? What are you trying to tell me? Her boat, he said. They found it. The diver found it this afternoon. Yes, I know, I said. Captain Searle came to tell me. You're thinking about the body, aren't you? The body the diver found in it? Yes. It means she was not alone. It means there was somebody sailing with Rebecca at the time, and you have to find out who it was. That's it, isn't it, Maxim? No, he said. No, you don't understand. I want to share this with you, Maxim. I want to help you. There was no one with Rebecca. She was alone. I did not move. I watched his face. It's Rebecca's body lying there in the boat, he said. No, I said. No. The woman buried below the church is not Rebecca. It's the body of some unknown woman unclaimed, belonging nowhere. There never was an accident. Rebecca was not drowned at all. I killed her. I shot Rebecca in the cottage in the bay. I carried her body to the boat and sailed it out that night and sank it there. But they found it today. It's Rebecca was lying dead there on the floor in the boat. Will you look into my eyes and tell me that you love me now? Quite brave from him to reveal that he killed his ex-wife. Well, ex, not ex really, but his former wife. It was very quiet in the library. When people suffer a great shock, like death or the loss of an arm or a leg, I believe they do not feel it at first. If your hand is gone, you don't know for a few minutes. You go on feeling the fingers. You stretch them and move them one by one. All the time there is nothing there. No hand, no fingers. I too felt no pain, no fear. There was no horror in my heart. Little by little, feeling will come back to me. I thought, will come back to me. I thought, little by little, I shall understand. What he has told me will fall into place, and I will understand. They will fit themselves into a pattern. At the moment, I am nothing. I have no heart, no mind, no senses. I'm just a wind thing in Maxim's arms. What will they do? I said stupidly. They will know it's her body. Everything is there. The shoes, the rings in her fingers, on her fingers. Then they will remember the other one, the woman buried below the church. What are you going to do? I whispered. I don't know, he said. I don't know. The feeling was coming back to me, little by little, as I knew it would. My hands were no longer cold. I felt a wave of color come into my face. Maxim had killed Rebecca. Rebecca had not been drowned at all. Maxim had killed Rebecca. He had carried her body to the boat and sunk the boat there in the bay. I began to understand Maxim's silence. The bay he never talked about, Rebecca. Sorry. The way he never talked about Rebecca. His dislike of the little bay, of the stone cottage. If you had my memories, you would not go there either. The way he went so quickly up the path through the woods, not looking behind him. I came away in rather a hurry, he said to Mrs. Van Hope, with that look on his face. They say he can't get over his wife's death. The fancy dress dance last night, and I coming to the head of the stairs in Rebecca's dress. I killed Rebecca, Maxim had said. I shot Rebecca in the cottage, and the diver had found her lying there on the floor of the boat. What are we going to do? I said. What are we going to say? Maxim did not answer. He stood there by the fireplace, his eyes wide and staring, looking in front of him. Not seeing anything. Does anyone know? Anyone at all? He shook his head. No. No one but you and me, I thought for a moment. Frank? I said suddenly. Are you sure Frank doesn't know? How could he? There was nobody there but myself. It was dark. He stopped. He sat down in a chair. He put his hand up to his forehead. I went and knelt beside him. He sat very still. I took his hand from his face and looked into his eyes. I love you, I whispered. I love you. Will you believe me now? He kissed me and held my hands very tightly, like a child needing comfort. I thought I would go mad, he said, sitting here day after day, waiting for something to happen, eating and drinking, trying to seem natural in front of Frith and the servants, Mrs. Danvers, whom I had not the courage to turn away because with her knowledge of Rebecca, she might have guessed. Frank, always by my side, and poor, dear Beatrice. I had to face them. All those people, knowing that every word I said was a lie. Why didn't you tell me? The time we've wasted when we might have been together, all those weeks. You were so distant, he said, always wandering into the garden with Jasper, going off on your own. You never came to me like this. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. Why didn't you tell me? I thought you weren't happy, bored. I'm so much older than you. You always had more to say to Frank than to me. You were strange with me. Awkward. How could I come to you when I knew you were thinking of Rebecca? How could I ask you to love me when I knew you still loved Rebecca? He pulled me close to him and searched my eyes. What are you talking about? What do you mean? Whenever you touched me, I thought you were comparing me with Rebecca. Whenever you spoke to me or looked at me, walked with me in the garden, sat down to dinner, I felt you were saying to yourself, this I did with Rebecca, and this, and this. He stared at me as if he did not understand. It was true, wasn't it? It was true, wasn't it? I said. Oh, my God, he said. He pushed me away and began walking up and down the room. What is it? What's the matter? He turned suddenly and looked at me as I sat there on the floor. You thought I loved Rebecca? You thought I killed her, loving her? I hated her. I tell you, our marriage was a lie from the very first. She was a terrible woman. Every bone in her body was bad. We never loved each other, never had one moment of happiness together. Rebecca had no love, no warmth. She was clever, of course, very clever. No one would guess that she was not a kind, generous, and caring person. She knew exactly what to say to everyone. If she had met you, she would have walked off into the garden with you, arm in arm, talking about flowers, music, painting, whatever she knew you were interested in. And you would have been deceived like the rest. You would have loved her. When I married her, I was told I was the luckiest man in the world. She was so lovely, so intelligent, so amusing. But all the time I had a seed of doubt at the back of my mind. There was something about her eyes. Bit by bit, the real Rebecca took shape in front of me. Once more, I stood on the beach with poor Ben. You're not like the other one. She gave you, you're not like the other one. She gave you the feeling of a snake. Maxim was talking though, walking, walking up and down the library. I discovered her true nature immediately. He was saying, 5 days after we were married, she told me about herself, told me things I shall never repeat to a living soul. I knew then what I had done, what I had married. She made a deal with me. I'll run from, sorry. I knew then what I had done when I had married. She made a deal with me. I'll run your house for you, she told me. I'll look after your dear old Manderley for you, make it the most famous showplace in the country, if you like. And people will visit us and be jealous of us and talk about us. They'll say we are the happiest, luckiest, best looking pair in England. What a joke, Max, she said, laughing. What a great joke. She knew I would give up pride, honor, personal feelings, everything, rather than stand before our little world after a week of marriage and have them know the things about her that she had told me then. I thought too much of Manderley. I put Manderley first, before anything else. And it isn't right, that sort of love. They don't speak about it in the churches. They don't speak about stones, bricks and walls, the love that a man can feel for his bit of earth, his home and castle. Maxim, my love, do you understand? He said. Do you? Do you? Yes, I said, but I looked away from him so that he did not see my face. What did it matter whether I understood? My heart was light as a feather. He had never loved Rebecca. She's so happy knowing that he didn't love her, but instead he loves her. Mrs. de Winter. I don't want to look back on those years. The misery, the disgust, the lie we lived, she and I, in front of friends, relations, even the servants. They all believed in her down. They all believed in her down here. They all admired her. They never knew how she laughed at them behind their backs. I can remember days when the place was full of some entertainment or other, a dance or a garden party, and she walked around with her arms through mine, that the next day she would be up at daybreak, driving to London to that flat of hers by the river, like an animal to its hole in the ground, coming back here at the end of the week after 5 unspeakable days. Oh, I kept my part of the deal all right. I never gave her away, and her good taste made Manderley what it is today. The gardens, the sitting room, even the flowers in the happy valley, the beauty of Manderley that people talk about and photograph and paint. It's all because of her, because of Rebecca. I did not say anything. I held him close. I wanted him to talk so that his bitterness would come out, carrying with it all the hatred and disgust of those lost years. And so we will and so we lived month after month, year after year. I accepted everything because of Manderley. What she did in London did not touch me because it did not hurt Manderley. And she was careful at first. There was never a whisper about her. Then she began to ask her friends down here. She would have them at her cottage in the bay. I told her she must keep to her part of the keep to her part of the deal. She could see her friends in London, but Manderley was mine. She smiled, but said nothing. Then she started on Frank. Poor pitiful Frank, who had not understood, who had always thought we were the normal happy pair we had pretended to be. I accused Rebecca, and we had a terrible sickening scene. She went up to London after that and stayed there a month. I thought she had learned her lesson. Then we had Beatrice and Giles for the weekend, and I realized then what I had what I had sometimes thought before, that Beatrice did not like Rebecca. I believe she saw through her, guessed that something was wrong. Giles went out sailing with Rebecca, and when they came back, I could see that this is a long chapter here. Oh wow. I didn't realize that it was such a long chapter today. Okay. Wow. All the sorry. I'm just checking for chapter 8. Okay. 8 is going to be a shorter chapter. But yeah, bear with me. Okay. All the piece she had started on him. Sorry. Guys went out sailing with Rebecca, and when they came back, I could see that she had started on him as she had done on Frank. So do you understand here what's happening? So Rebecca started on, it seems like she was hitting on Frank and now on Giles. So hitting on someone means that she was flirty with him. She would try to seduce them both. All the pieces were fitting into place for me now. Frank's awkward manner when I spoke about Rebecca, Beatrice's strange attitude. The silence I had always taken from sympathy was a silence of shame and embarrassment. It seemed unbelievable now that I had never understood. I wondered how many people there were who suffered because they could not break out from their own self-consciousness and awkwardness. I had never had the courage to demand the truth. If I had taken one step, Maxim would have told me these things months ago. Rebecca became careful again. He went on. Her behavior was faultless. But if I happened to be away when she was here at Manderley, I could never be certain what might happen. There had been Frank and Giles. She might get hold on. There had been Frank and Giles. She might get hold of one of our workmen, someone from Kerrith, anyone, and then the blow will fall. The talk, the shame I feared. So it seems like Frank and Giles had an affair with her. So Giles, remember, he is Beatrice's husband. So he cheated on her with Rebecca. Hmm, that's not cool. It seems like Beatrice, is she aware of this? Who knows? Perhaps. But it seems like she accepted it. I mean, she kind of forgave uh, her husband. Her behavior was, yeah, she might get hold of one of our workmen, someone from Kerrith, anyone, and then the blow would fall. The talk, the shame I feared. She had a cousin who had been abroad but was living in England again. He began coming here if ever I was away. A man called Jack Favell, sorry. So it seems like she had an affair with Jack Favell as well. I know him. He came here the day you were in London. You saw him too? Why didn't you tell me? I heard it from Frank. Oh, so here we know it's Frank who told him about Jack Favell and the fact that Mrs. Danvers um, allowed him to come in. Um, I thought it would remind you of Rebecca, I said. Remind me, whispered Maxim, as if I needed reminding. He paused, and I wondered if he was thinking, as I was, of that flooded boat beneath the waters in the bay. She used to have his she used to have this Pavel down to the cottage, said Maxim. She would tell the servant she was going to sell and would not be back before the morning. Then she would spend the night down there with him. Once again, I warned her. I said, if I found him here, anywhere in the grounds, I'd shoot him. The very thought of him walking around the woods at Manderley in places like the Happy Valley made me mad. I told her I would not stand it. Then one day she went up to London and came back again the same day, which she did not usually do. I did not expect her. I had dinner that night with Frank at his house. I returned after dinner at about 10:30, and I saw her things in the hall. I wondered what the devil she had come back for, but she was not there. I guessed she had gone off again, down to the bay, and I knew I could not stand this life of lies and deceit any longer. I thought I'd take a gun and frighten them both. I went straight down to the cottage. The servants never knew I had come back to the house at all. I slipped out into the garden and through the woods. I saw a light in the cottage window and went straight in. To my surprise, Rebecca was alone. She looked ill and strange. I began immediately to talk to her about Favell. This is the end, do you understand? What you do in London does not concern me. You can live with Favell there and with anyone you like, but not here, not at Manderley. She said nothing for a moment. She looked at me and then she smiled. Suppose it suits me better to live here. What then? You know the conditions, I said. I've kept my part of our miserable deal, haven't I? But you've cheated. You think you can treat my house and my home like your own hall in London? I've had enough. And my God, Rebecca, this is your last chance. She stretched herself, her arms above her head. You're right, Max, she said. It's time I changed. She looked very pale, very thin. She began walking up and down, her hands in her pockets. Have you ever thought, she said, how hard it would be for you to make a case against me, in a court of law, I mean? Do you realize that you wouldn't have a hope of proving anything? All your friends, even the servants, believe our marriage to be a success. What about Frank? What about Beatrice? She's threatening him. She threw back her head and laughed. What sort of story do you think Frank could tell against mine? As for Beatrice, wouldn't as for Beatrice, wouldn't be the easiest thing in the world to show her to be an ordinary jealous woman whose husband once lost his head and made a fool of himself? Oh no, Max. Sorry. You you'd have a difficult time trying to prove anything against me. She stood watching me, her hands in her pockets and a smile on her face. Do you realize that I could get Danny to swear anything I asked here? I asked her to swear, and that the rest of the servants would follow her? They think we live together at Manderley as husband and wife, don't they? And so does everyone, your friends, all our little world. Well, how are you going to prove that we don't? She sat down on the edge of the table, swinging her leg, watching me. Haven't we acted the parts of a loving husband and wife rather too well? She said. I remember watching that foot of hers, swinging backwards and forwards, and my eyes and brain began to burn. We could make you look very foolish, Danny and I, she said softly. We could make we could make you look so foolish that no one would believe you. Max, no one would believe you, Max. Nobody at all. Still, that foot of hers was swinging backwards and forwards. Suddenly, she slipped off the table and stood in front of me, smiling still, her hands in her pockets. If I had a child, Max, neither you nor anyone in the world could prove that it was not yours. It would grow up here in Manderley, bearing your name. There would be nothing you could do. And when you died, Manderley would be his. You could not prevent it. You would like that, wouldn't you? You would enjoy it, seeing my son asleep under the trees, playing in the grass, picking flowers in the happy valley. You would love watching my son growing bigger day by day and knowing that when you died, all this would be his. After a minute, she went to the window. She began to laugh. She went on laughing. I thought she would never stop. God, how funny, how beautifully funny. Well, you heard me say I was going to change, didn't you? Now you know the reason. They'll be happy one day, all the people here. It's what we've always hoped for, Mrs. de Winter, they'll say. I'll be the perfect mother, Max, as I've been the perfect wife. And none of them will ever guess, none of them will ever know. She turned round and faced me, smiling, one hand in her pocket. When I killed her, she was smiling still. I fired at her heart. The bullet passed right through her. She did not fall immediately. She stood there looking at me with that slow smile on her face, her eyes wide open. This is horrible. This is love, guys. No, this is not love. This is marriage. I had to get, sorry, I had to get water from the bay, Maxim continued. I had to keep going for more. There was blood all around where she lay on the floor. The wind began to blow harder too. There was no hook on the window. It kept banging backwards and forwards while I knelt there on the floor with that cloth and the bucket of water beside me. I carried her to the boat. It must have been 11:30 by then, or nearly 12. It was quite dark. There was no moon. The wind was blowing hard at times from the west. I carried her below and left her there. Then, I had to sail out. Sorry, and then I had to sail out of the little harbor against the tide with the rowing boat behind me. It was difficult. It was blowing all right, but I was sheltered by the cliffs. I remember I got the sail stuck. I hadn't sailed, you see, for a long time. I never went out with Rebecca, but I got the boat out into the bay beyond the cliff. I tried to turn her, to get well away from the rocks. Suddenly the wind blew harder. It tore the rope from my hands. The sail began to thunder and shake. I couldn't remember what one had to do. I couldn't remember. I tried to reach the rope, but it wasn't a whip. It was like a whip in the air above my head. The wind was coming from in front of us, and we were being blown back. It was dark, so dark that I couldn't see anything on the black slippery boat. Somehow I got down below. I had a heavy tool in my hand. If I didn't do something now, it would be too late. Being blown like this, we would soon be out of deep water. I drove the pointed tool into the bottom boards. It was heavy. It slipped one of the boards right across. I pulled it out and drove the point into another board, then another. The water came up over my feet. I left Rebecca there on the floor and shut the windows and the door. When I came back, I saw how near the shore we had been driven by the wind. I climbed into the rowing boat and watched. She was sinking. The sails were still banging about, and I thought someone would hear someone walking on the cliffs late at night, or some fisherman from Carith whose boat I could not see. Her nose was sinking first. Then she turned over onto her side. Suddenly she was not there anymore. I remember staring at the place where she had been. Then I rowed back to the harbour. It started to rain. Maxim stopped, still staring straight in front of him. Then he turned to me. "That's all," he said. "There's no more to tell." I walked up the path through the woods. I went into the house. I remember undressing. It was blowing and raining hard, off and on. I was sitting there on the bed when Mrs. Danvers knocked on the door. I went and opened it in my nightclothes and spoke to her. She was worried about Rebecca, but I told her to go back to bed. I shut the door again and went back and sat by the window, watching the rain, listening to the sea down in the bay. We sat there together without saying anything. I went on, holding his cold hands. "She sank too close in," said Maxim. "I meant to take her right out into the bay. They would never have found her there. It was the ship. They would never have found her if it were not for the ship." "She sank too close in," Maxim repeated. And here it's interesting to see that specifically because of the English language and the fact that we use the pronoun she for a boat, and how it blurs the line between, are we talking about the ship or Rebecca? Both. So this analogy with Rebecca and the boat sinking, both of them sinking, is very interesting here. We were silent again. I began to feel very tired. I knew it would happen one day, said Maxim. It was only a question of time. Finding you has not made any difference, has it? Loving you does not change things at all. Rebecca knew she would win in the end. I saw her smile when she died. Rebecca's dead. She can't harm you anymore. There's her body. The diver has the diver has seen it. It's lying there on the floor of the boat. We've got to explain it. We've got to. It must be the body of someone you don't know, someone you have never seen before. Her things will still be there, he said. The rings on her fingers, even if her clothes have decayed in the water, there will be something there to tell them. It's not like a body lost at sea, bitten against the rocks. How will you find out? How will you know? The diver is going down again at 5 in the morning. Searle has made all the arrangements. They're going to try to raise the boat. No one will be around. I'm going with them. And then Searle is going to try to get her back to Kerrith and put her in the mud halfway up Kerrith Harbour. He'll get the water out of her. He's going to get hold of a doctor. If they found out it's Rebecca, you must say the other body in the church was a mistake. Terrible mistake. You must you must say you must say that when you went up to Edgecombe, you were ill. You must say that when you went up to Edgecombe, you were ill. You didn't know what you were doing. You weren't sure, even then. You will say that, won't you? Yes, he said. Yes. They can't prove anything against you, I said. Nobody saw you that night. You had gone to bed. They can't prove anything. No one knows but you and I. No one at all, not even Frank. We're the only two people in the world to know, Maxim. You and I. Yes, he said. Yes. So in a way, here, finally, this young Mrs. de Winter finds something that us, only us, share. This lie or this secret, and it seems like she finally has found a way or found something that Rebecca and Maxim didn't have, sharing the secret. They'll think the boat turned over and sank when Rebecca was down below. They'll think she went below for a rope or something, and while she was there, the wind came across the bay and the boat turned over and Rebecca was trapped. They'll think that, won't they? I don't know, he said. I don't know. Suddenly the telephone began ringing in the little room behind the library. Maxim went in and shut the door. Robert came in to take away the tea. I stood up, my back to him, so that he wouldn't see my face. I wondered when they would know how long it would take for the news to spread. When Robert had gone, Maxim came back into the room. It was Colonel Julian. He's just been talking to Searle. He's coming out to the boat with us tomorrow. Why Colonel Julian? Why? He's the Justice of Peace for Kerrith. And you've got a note here, Justice of the Justice of Peace, which is a person who judges cases of a local law court. He has to be present. What did he say? He asked me if I had any idea whose body it would be. I said I didn't know. I said we believed Rebecca to be alone. I said I didn't know of any friend. Did he say anything after that? He asked me if I thought it possible that I made a mistake when I went up to Edgecombe. He said that. He said that already. Yes. And you? I said it might be possible. I didn't know. He'll be with you there tomorrow when you look at the boat. Oh, he'll be there. He'll be with you there tomorrow when you look at the boat. He and Captain Searle. And a doctor? Inspector Welsh, too. Inspector Welsh? Yes. Why Inspector Welsh? It's the custom when a body has been found. He looked, has been found. He looked quickly out of the window. The wind has died away again. Yes, I said. It will be a flat, calm tomorrow. It will be a flat calm tomorrow by the diver for the diver, he said. We dressed for dinner as usual. Afterwards, we went back to the library. We did not talk much. I sat on the floor at Maxim's feet, my head against his knees. There was no shadows us, between us anymore. I wondered how I could be so happy when the little world about us was so black. It was a strange sort of happiness, not what I had dreamed about. There was nothing feverish or urgent about it. It was a quiet, still happiness. The library windows were wide open and looked out at the dark, dull sky. At about 11:30 the next morning, there was a message that Maxim was bringing Frank and Colonel Julien to lunch. The morning dragged slowly on. It was very hot. I went upstairs and changed into a thinner dress. Then I sat and waited. At 1:05, I heard the sound of a car in a drive and voices. I stood up, waiting for them to come into the room. In the mirror, my face looked very pale. Maxim came in, and Frank and Colonel Julien. How do you do? Colonel Julien said. He spoke seriously and quietly, like a doctor. Give Colonel Julien a drink, said Maxim. We were just going to wash. Colonel Julien did not have anything to drink. I took some to give me something to hold. He came and stood beside me at the window. This is the most disturbing thing, Mrs. de Winter, he said gently. I do feel for you and your husband very much. Thank you, I said. I put my glass down on the table. I was afraid that he would notice that my hand was shaking. What makes it so difficult is your husband saying he recognized the first body at Edgecombe over a year ago. I don't quite understand. You didn't hear then what we found this morning? I knew there was a body. The diver found a body. Yes, then looking over his shoulder towards the door, I'm afraid it was her, without a doubt. I can't go into details, but both your husband and Dr. Phillips were sure. He stopped suddenly and moved away from me. Maxim and Frank had came back into the room. Lunch is ready. Shall we go? Said Maxim. As we drank our coffee, Colonel Julien started again in his quiet way. I looked steadily at my plate. I was saying to your wife before lunch, de Winter, that the awkward part of this whole business is the fact that you said you recognized that original body. I think the mistake was very natural, said Frank quickly. It was suggested that the body was hers when he was asked to go up to Edgecombe. Besides, Maxim was not well at the time. I wanted to go with him, but he was determined to go alone. He was not in a fit state to decide anything of the sort. That's nonsense, said Maxim. I was perfectly well. Well, it's no good going into all that now. You recognize the body, and now the only thing to do is to admit your mistake. There seems to be no doubt about it this time. I wish you could be spared a public inquiry, but I'm afraid that's quite impossible. It needn't take very long. It's just a matter of your saying you recognize the body and then getting Tab, the boat builder, to say that the boat was in good order when he last had had her in his yard. No, what worries me is the noise the newspaper will make about it. So sad and unpleasant for you and your wife. That's quite all right, said Maxim. We understand. So unfortunate that that ship getting into trouble there. But for that, the whole matter would have rested in peace. The only thing is we now know that Mrs. de Winter's death must have been sudden. Not the slow affair we imagined it to be. No question of trying to swim. None, said Maxim. She must have gone below for something. And then the door stuck and suddenly a strong wind caught the boat with nobody on the lookout. That seems to be the solution, don't you think, Crawley? Oh, yes, undoubtedly, said Frank. I looked up and saw Frank looking at Maxim. He turned away again immediately, but not before I had seen and understood the expression in his eyes. Frank knew, and Maxim did not know that he knew. I went on drinking my coffee. My hand holding the cup was hot and wet. I suppose sooner or later we all make a mistake in judgment, said Colonel Julian. Mrs. de Winter must have known how the wind comes round the cliff in that bay. It wasn't safe to leave a small boat like that and go down below. She must have sailed alone over that spot many times. Then, just once, she took a chance, and the chance killed her. Accidents happen. Accidents happened so easily, said Frank. Even to the most experienced people. Yes, but if Mrs. de Winter hadn't gone below the accident, how it hadn't gone below, the accident would never have happened. A strange thing to do. I never knew her to make a mistake in the boat. That was the sort of thing only a beginner would do. It was blowing hard that night. Something may have got stuck, and then she slipped down for a knife. Of course, of course. Well, we shall never know. As I said, I wish I could stop the inquiry, but I can't. It will be as short as possible, but I'm afraid we shan't be able to keep the newspaper reporters out of it. I did not look at Frank when he said goodbye. I was afraid he would understand my eyes. I did not want him to know that I knew. When they had gone, Maxim said, "It's going to be all right. I'm quite confident. You saw how Gillian was at lunch, and Frank. There won't be any difficulty at the inquiry. It's going to be all right." I did not say anything. I held his arm tightly. There was never any question of the body being someone unknown. It was quite obvious this morning that what we saw was enough for Dr. Phillips to recognize her, even without me. There was no sign of what I had done. The bullet had not touched the bone. You heard what they said. They think she was trapped there, down below. They will believe that at the inquiry. They will believe that at the inquiry too. Dr. Phillips will tell them. He paused. Still, I did not speak. I only mind for you, he said. If it had to come all over again, I would not do anything different. I'm glad I killed Rebecca. I shall never be sorry for that. Never, never. But I can't forget what it has done to you. It's gone forever. That funny, young, lost look that I loved. It won't come back again. I killed that too, when I told you about Rebecca. It's gone. In 24 hours. You're so much older. It was in all the papers the next day. Pictures of Maxim and of Manderley. They described Rebecca as beautiful, clever, popular, and Maxim as marrying again the following spring and bringing his young wife to Manderley, giving a big fancy dress dance for her. And then the next morning, the body of his first wife being found trapped in her sailing boat at the bottom of the bay. It made a good story. I thought of all the things they could say if they knew the truth all over the front page. Newsboys shouting in the streets. That terrible six-letter word printed large in black. Frank came up after breakfast. He looked pale and tired, as though he had not slept. I've told them to put all phone calls for Manderley through to the office. He said, sorry. I told them to put all the telephone calls for Manderley through to the office, he said. If those newspaper men ring up, I can deal with them. Those reporters, we all want to kick them, but you've got to see their point of view. It's their job, but you won't have to see them or speak to them. Maxim, all you have to think about is your statement at the inquiry. I know what to say. Of course you do, but don't forget that old Horridge will be in charge. He's an awkward sort of man and likes to go into details just to show how thorough he is. You mustn't let him worry you. Why the devil should I be worried? I have nothing to be worried about. Of course not, but I've been to these inquiries before, and it's easy to get annoyed. You don't want to lose your temper. Frank's right, I said. I know just what he means. The more quickly and smoothly the whole thing goes, the easier it will be for everyone. Then once it's over, we'll forget all about it. And so will everyone else. Won't they, Frank? Yes, of course, said Frank. I still avoided his eye, but I was surer than ever that he knew the truth. He had always known it from the very beginning. And that's the end of this long chapter of seven of this long chapter 7. And now let's move on to chapter 8, which is just a couple of pages. Just bear with me for this short chapter. The inquiry. On the way to the inquiry, Maxim was quite calm. It was like going with someone to the hospital, someone who was going to have an operation and not knowing what would happen, not knowing whether the operation would be successful. My hands were very cold. My heart was beating strangely. When we got there, I decided not to go in, but to wait outside in the car. It was early closing day. The shop looked dull and there were very few people about. I sat looking at the silent shops as the minutes went by. I wondered what was happening. I got out of the car and began walking up and down. Somehow, without wanting to, I came to the building where the inquiry was being held. A policeman appeared from nowhere. You can't wait here. I'm sorry, I said, turning away. Oh, excuse me, ma'am. Of course, you're Mrs. de Winter, aren't you? I can wait. I can wait in here if you like. He showed me into a small empty room, like a waiting room in a rail station. I sat there. 5 minutes passed and nothing happened. It was worse than being outside in the car. I got up and went into the passage. Policemen was standing there. How long would there be? I'll go and inquire if you like. In a moment, he was back again. I don't think there'll be very much longer, he said. Mr. De Winter has just made his statement. Captain Searle, the diver, and Dr. Phillips has given theirs. There's only one more to speak. Mr. Tabb, the boat builder. Then it's nearly over. I expect so, ma'am. Would you like to hear the rest of it? There's a chair just inside the door. If you slip in now, nobody will notice you. Yes, I said. Yes, I think I will. I followed the policeman, slipped in and sat down just by the door. The room was smaller than I had imagined, and very hot. There were people there that I didn't know. I looked at them out of the corner of my eye. My heart gave a jump suddenly as I recognized Mrs. Danvers. And Pavel was beside her. These two plotting again? I looked at them out of the corner of my eye. My heart gave a jump suddenly as I recognized Mrs. Danvers. And Favel was beside her. Sorry, Jack Favel, Rebecca's cousin. I had not expected him to be there. James Tabb, the builder, was standing up now, answering questions. Was the boat in a fit state to put to sea? She was when I fixed her up in April of last year. That would be Mrs. De Winter's fourth season with the boat. Had the boat ever been known to turn over before? No, sir. I should soon have heard from Mrs. De Winter if there had been any question of it. She was pleased with the boat in every way, from what she said to me. I suppose great care was needed in handling the boat? Well, sir, everyone has to be careful sailing a boat. It's true. But this one was strong, well-built boat and could stand a lot of wind. Mrs. De Winter had sailed her. Mrs. De Winter had sailed her in worse weather than that night. Why, it was only blowing now and again. That's what I said all along. I couldn't understand her boat going down on a night like this. But surely, if Mrs. De Winter went below for a coat, as if supposed, and the sudden strong wind were to come round that cliff, it would be enough to turn the boat over? James Tabb shook his head. No, I don't believe that it would. Well, I'm afraid that's what must have happened. I don't think Mr. De Winter or any of suggests that you were to blame at all. You fixed the boat up at the beginning of the season. You say she was in good condition, and that's all I want to know. It seems that Mrs. De Winter was careless for a moment and she lost her life, the boat sinking with her on board. Such things have happened before, I repeat. We are not blaming you. Excuse me, sir, said the boat builder, but there is a bit more to it than that. And if you allow me, I'd like to make a further statement. Very well, go on. It's like this, sir. It's like this, sir. After the accident last year, a lot of people in Kerris said I had let Mrs. De Winter start the season in a damaged boat that let the water in. I lost some work because of it. It was very unfair, but the boat had sunk, and there was nothing I could say to defend myself. Well, I went to have a look at her yesterday. I wanted to satisfy myself that the work I had done was all right. Well, that was very natural. I hope you were satisfied? Yes, sir, I was. There was nothing wrong with my work. I examined it all. She'd sunk onto sand. I asked the diver about that, and he told me so. She hadn't touched the rocks. They were 1.5 meters away. She was lying on sand. and there wasn't the mark of a rock on her. He paused. Well, is that all you want to say? No, it's not. What I want to know is this. Who made the holes in her? Rocks didn't do it. The nearest rock was 1.5 meters away. Besides, they weren't the sort of holes made by a rock. They were made with some pointed tool. On purpose. I did not look at him. I looked at the floor. It was hot. Much too hot. Why didn't they open the window? Why didn't they open the window? I wondered why no one said anything. Why did the silence last so long? What do you mean? What holes? The voice sounded very far away. There were 3 of them, driven through her with something sharp, with those holes in her. It wouldn't take long for a small boat like her to sink. Not 10 minutes, I should say. Those holes were not there when the boat left my boatyard. It's my opinion, sir, that the boat never turned over at all. She was sunk on purpose. I must try to get out of the door. There was no air in the place. They were talking. Someone in front of me was standing up and I couldn't see anything. It was so hot, so very hot. Maxim was standing up now. I could not look at him. Mr. de Winter, you heard the statement from James Tabb. Do you know anything of these holes in the boat? Nothing at all. Mr. de Winter, I want to believe that we all feel for you in this matter. No doubt you have suffered a shock, a great shock, in learning that your wife was found in her boat and not at sea as you supposed. I am inquiring into the matter for you. I want to find out exactly how and why she died. James Tabb has just said that the boat had 3 holes hammered through her bottom. Do you doubt his statement? Of course not. He's a boat builder. He knows what he's talking about. Who looked after Mrs. Winter's boat? Mrs. de Winter's boat? She looked after it herself. She employed no man to help her. No, nobody at all. The boat was kept in the private harbour at Manderley. Yes. Any stranger who tried to damage the boat would be seen. There is no public footpath to the harbour. No. Yet James Tabb has told us that the boat with those holes hammered in her probably could not float for more than 10 minutes. Yes, so that the boat cannot have been damaged before Mrs. de Winter took her out, or she would have sunk in the harbour. No doubt. Therefore, we must suppose that whoever took the boat out that night made the holes in her. Yes. You have told us already that the door was shut, the windows also, and your wife's remains were on the floor. This was in your statement in Dr. Phillips and in Captain Searle's. Yes. And now comes the statement that with some sharp instrument, 3 holes had been made in the bottom. Does this not strike you as very strange? Certainly. You have no suggestion to make? None at all. Mr. de Winter, painful as it may be, it is my duty to ask you a very personal question. Were the relations between you and your first wife perfectly happy? It was hot, so hot with all these people. No open window. The door was further away than I had thought. And all the time the ground coming up to me to meet me. And then came Maxim's voice. clear and strong. Will someone take my wife outside? She's going to faint. Saved by the bell. And that's the end of chapter 8. And this long reading session today, I didn't, my mistake if um, you didn't plan on staying that long, but if you're watching this on replay now, then you have time to pause and come back later. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this live reading session and that probably you will get more into the story and that will make you want to attend the live workshop this Saturday. So make sure that you subscribe to the book club membership to attend this workshop and many more. I wish you a beautiful end of the day, and I will see you tomorrow for our final live reading session of this month. We will read the last chapters of Rebecca, this one. So we will read chapter 9 and 10, the final chapters, and get to the bottom of the story and see whether Max will be arrested or if he's going to be sent to prison or not. That's a mystery. I see you next time. Bye bye.